I was born in Big Spring, Texas in 1937, June 27th. And it was a drought period. Things were tough. And Mother had told Daddy that if they got married and had children, it's going to be in the hospital. And it was about 65 miles or something like that. And had the baby, and her sister came up to see her that day and said, you know, Doris said, this is really good. You've got the really nice little baby boy. And Mother said, yes, but we really needed a calf. You know, times were tough. Rancher grew up in West Texas. His father and his father's brother came over from Prussia in 1880, went out to West Texas and out there and went just as far as he could go on the railroad, then bought a wagon and horses and drove on out to Sterling City in Tom Green County at that time. And he built a house, actually dug a hole in the ground and had a house underground. It was cheaper land. He could pay $1 an acre for it. But Daddy and a younger brother were together and ranching, and Daddy married, and Mother had gone to Southwestern University in Georgetown. She was a liberated woman before they ever understood that. She got out there and played basketball. That was when they had the long skirts. Women wore that to play basketball, and in that process they changed and had these pantaloons, you know. They just split it up and had two legs and tied at the bottom, and it didn't show much, but her parents said, you're not going to play in your underwear out there. And she said, I am. And they said, you're not, but she did. And then when she and Daddy were going to get married, she'd gone to Southwestern University. Come to think of it, 3 years is great. Then the drought came in, and old Grandpa Bell said there's no more money, and he was selling that or his property was going back to the bank or somewhere. And so after 3 years, she said, and Grandpa said, no, you can't go to school. We don't have any money. She said, I'm going. They said no. She packed her bag, got on a bus, went to Southwestern, walked into there. Of course, they knew her, and she's a good student. And she said, I'm here. I don't have any money. You're going to have to help me. They did. And she and Daddy got hooked up through the church. At some church meeting, Daddy made a presentation, and he wasn't a speaker, but he lived close, and he looked at her and what on. They got going and got married. Well, you'd farm, but primarily it was cattle and sheep and goats. And Daddy ran a sharing crew where he'd going around and sharing people's sheep and goats. Daddy, at that point, was looking around and finally found a place in Whitney, right out of Whitney, and he bought two little places and made about 400 acres on that. And so he moved there, and I was, it's a big trip, 6 weeks old. And I had no concept of it. I do know that the Brazos River, we had to cross that, and it's one of those things where there was a bridge, and the water was over the bridge going in, so they were driving the trucks and all this stuff across, and the car that Mother was driving with me and Leonard, my older brother, stalled out. So Daddy walked back out, got the car, they pulled it on over. And then we lived there and went to Whitney school system and church in town until I was 9. I'm going into the 4th grade. And Lake Whitney was going to be put in. They'd already started to buy land. And they bought a lot of land high around what Daddy had on both those little places there. And they were going to get maybe 40% of the land. So Daddy said, this ain't going to work. So he got to looking and checking and found a place over at Meridian. And so we moved over there in 1946. And it's interesting that the property there actually was the governor, Ma and Paul Ferguson, and that was their retreat. They built a couple of houses out there, one for the servants to live in, the driver, and she had her big Packard car and had a garage way off down by the barn, but he built barns and milking places and such, and bought a creamery and said, "You're going to show these people how to farm," and he kind of rubbed them the wrong way. But we settled in that place, and it was 1,200 acres. Someone at some place had made him say, "Well, Mr. Radde," said, "what do you do?" And he said, "Well, by profession, I'm a rancher, but I'm carpentering to pay the bills." But we made it through the 50s, and I went to Southwestern, got a scholarship there, and Leonard, he was ahead of me, went to Tarleton. We also had a younger brother, 4.5 years younger than me, and then a sister that was born 3 years after Kenneth was born. And Kenneth went to A&M, and Alice went to Southwestern University. The summertime, you had summer camp up at Glenrose. And the DS, district superintendent, put me in charge of our district, and there were 3 districts together, so we'd go up there and plan the camps, and the kids would come in there. And, the boys thing, and then the girls, and that was a good place to meet girls. So I met my wife, Susan McCarty, there, and we got to going together. In fact, she was in Fort Worth. She grew up in Fort Worth, lived in the Meadowbrook section. Her birth father was killed in World War II, and she never knew him. Well, he was taken in one of those 9-week volunteers and such, and in Patton's army just before the Battle of the Bulge, and artillery got him. But and she has a picture on the front porch with both of her fathers. At that point, Monroe was there, Monroe McCarty, and then Hall Splon. Then they were good friends. Okay, whenever Hall went overseas, he said, "If anything happens to me, take care of Beryl and Susan." And Monroe did. Got married, had a girl, and had one of his own like this. But it was a good thing because he was a great father. We got married in 1963 on January 25th, and she was in school at North Texas. And then we lived in Cleburne at that time, and I was working with the Methodist Church as a conference director of youth work, and that's where the office was. Then we moved to Bartlett and down in the Temple district. When we were in Temple, Eric was born. From that, we came up to Fort Worth on the north side, where it was a changing neighborhood, and they wanted me to come in there and see what I could do. So we worked there for 3 years, and then there were some moves, and so we moved from there to Mahia. And that was a pretty good jump, and that's where Bill had been born. So we had 2, 3 years apart. From Mahia, which was a 5-year appointment, good people. And I tried to push them to be more open in a lot of ways, and did. It was a good time for us and the kids. But anyway, from there, then we got called to come to Arlington Heights in West Fort Worth, and we lived on the west side. Bought a house because they didn't have a parsonage at that point. Churches moved differently, and we went from Arlington Heights over to First Church Hurst. We're just moving across town, and that was a settled community. They all worked for the General Dynamics pretty much. You get over here at Hurst, and man, it's a buzzing. And people might come in living with the company, but knowing that in 3 or 4 years that's going to be gone. There was turnover, but we did have plenty of solid people. And we came in actually November of 1983. And I'm senior pastor also at Arlington Heights, but Hurst is a unique church, and it had some good leadership right before I got there, and some things were set, but Hurst was booming. You know, people coming in, Hurst was building houses and this sort of thing, and everybody came in to visit with me. That was wonderful, you know, and I'm getting acquainted and talking to them. And then they'd talk about what the church was doing and how they had been active and all this sort of thing. And I got to looking, and a lot of these people that were coming by to see me were movers and shakers in the church and in the community. Fact is, the city council, the mayor was Baptist, but he married a Methodist and had a lot of connections there. All the city council except one were Methodist. And if they wanted something, they'd talk to the ones in the Methodist church, and they'd either vote it down or vote it up. I mean, these people were leaders. Then, of course, Edna Anderson and Reg, and they were some of the best people you'd ever want to know. And it was a tragic thing that Reg died just as I was coming. Fact is, he died that day, and I knew him, but I didn't get to work with him. Key leadership, except for one, were all under 40 years of age. So at that point, it was easier to get some things going. And when we say under 40, okay, Glenn Whitley and his family, Dr. Spradley, and bankers, seniors, you know, and such, and they were professional people, and they were ready to do stuff. We had softball teams and basketball and all kinds of stuff going on for children. Vacation Bible school, you know, we'd have in our area down there. It's not as good as what it is now, but we reached out into the community. As I say, the Hurst community was dynamic. You know, the houses being built and such, and people looking and coming, and businesses going up. The airport, oh yeah, it was open way back there. The mall was not. And part of it was that came in here and they were buying land, buying houses, and such, and then some of them didn't want to. And we had members living there. And the eminent domain was going, and it was kind of a thing that I wasn't sure about because, you know, growing up in the country, you got your property, but your water is yours. And sometimes they're going to say, well, we're going to come through here this highway, and we're going to buy this. And you say, I don't want to sell it. They say, we don't care. And that was kind of in my thinking when it came there, and there were some people that got pinched. But the other side of that was one of the best things that ever happened to Hurst. Isom Chapel, it was a country church, and they had the revivals in the summertime like everybody did. You know, all the Protestants, they'd have a revival and such. And they had some children, a few youth, but it was just a family church, and started by this preacher, Reverend Isom. And they had some other ones after that, but he was the one that started it, and man, it went back years. I'd have to look it up to get that on that. Edna was a young woman when they got married, and she played the piano and taught Sunday school. When Bell Helicopter came in, they moved in on Harmon Road, the church did. And gosh, there's about, 50 people came. It was hard for some of them, but most of them were excited and went to Harmon Road. Had a building there that was built, and it was nice, but the way they were going and the way the Hurst was growing at that time, filled it up. They ran out of space, and there wasn't a good place to build right there. They were Ison Chapel Methodist Church. Then they came into Harmon Road, and it was Harmon Road Methodist Church. Then when they came on up here to the present location, it was the First Methodist Church. Then the Methodist Church went with the Evangelical Brethren, and then the African American Methodist Church came together and united, so then it became the United Methodist Church of Hurst. So, and every time it happened, the name changed, but it was still the same when they got there. And that was what it was there whenever I came. And you start looking around, and there's no place for Sunday schools. We had an excellent children's school there. But we had 3 services on Sunday morning, 8:30 and 9:30 and 10:50. And I used to say, okay, the smartest people in this area are the ones that can come find this church and then be able to find their way back, because it was off the beaten path. We began to talk about building and what do we want to do. And we got a committee they say you can call small committees. I got a person out of every thing, the Sunday schools, the groups, men, women, whatever, and Edna was on that in the planning of it, and Bobby Roberts, Sidney Roberts' wife, they were good people and they were best friends. So we started a big campaign, and people some of these other ones would say, conference sent you out here to build a church, didn't they? And said, we don't want to build one. And I said, no, they said, you're a builder. And I said, nope, I've never built a church or anything where I was. I helped pay off the debts. But no, I don't know how to. So we worked on that. I managed to get an ulcer in that process. But we had to do something. And they knew that. And some of them that said, we're opposed to it, doesn't mean we're not going to give to it. Several of those that had come in and talked to me about not building, and I'd explained what the deal was, such, they came and apologized. I was out one morning about 10 to 11, before that thing opened, and people were coming in, and this guy was like 75 years old, and he said, look at all these people coming in here. And I said, yeah, but there's, and he said, I don't know one of them. I thought, oh man, here we go again. And I said, well, what are you thinking? He said, great, it's just wonderful. I wouldn't want to belong to a church where I knew everybody. You keep thinking that something needs to be done. Church is more than just coming up here and having Sunday school and breakfasts and such like this. So that was something that I learned early on, that we need to be a significant thing in the community. And so that's where, wherever I was, I tried to say, what is the need that's not being met? And so I got up here at Hurst, and a lot of other people were asking that same thing. It's in their DNA now. It actually started right across the creek in a dentist area, and it was a clothes closet. People would bring their clothes, put them over there, and then people would come in and buy them. And it grew so big and so fast, and it was, I think Texas Methodist Foundation, which I had been on their board, put some money in that building, loaned them to buy it. And then Mission Central has gone out where it feeds people in the area. People are low income and such. And then from that, they've got English as second language. They also had a clothes closet there, but then they moved it across the freeway because those are really nice stuff, the clothes that they had. But just recently, they have opened up a thrift store. I started a thing that I started in Arlington Heights, but Harvest Festival. You know, the large acre, that was a big deal, you know, in the rural areas, but this is in the city, and the women were having their little United Methodist Women's a sale of stuff, and they'd come along and get maybe $5,000-6,000. But I wanted to put this in where the church would be able to do things, and also get every class was going to have a project. I wanted every person to be able to do something. And it's not just to give money, but it was to bake cakes, you know, and have projects and work deals and this sort of thing. And I had to work with the ladies, and they were kind. And so the first one we did, we brought in $20,000. And we paid the ladies about the $7,000 that they were normally getting. And it grew to where we'd bringing in $50,000, and it all went to mission work. It did not go to the budget. And so that church really was able to reach out in the community and beyond, support missionaries and things like that. They built in a house where they live now. And as they were building it, Brenda Whitley said, "Look, I want to fix up our bedroom with a quilt, covers, you know, shams, and all the stuff and the window work and everything like this." And then the women are going to make it, and they put it in auction at the church, and then Glenn would buy it and already be ready to go. Well, that worked real good. But some of these guys now, they kind of played jokes on each other. Glenn got in and started bidding. And first, Glenn would look around and say, some of his buddies, were they bidding against him, you know, just to run it up? No. And this guy was sitting there, and it got up to $5,000. And Glenn said, "Stop." He said, let's stop here just a minute. He went over to John and said, "John, are you just pumping me up, or do you want?" He said, "My wife said she wanted that." And he said, "I'm going to get it for her. You can keep bidding, but somewhere you'll stop, but I'm not going to." So Glenn did get smart. He said, "Look, will y'all make another one just like it?" "Yes, we will." And he said, "Now, John and I we're going to each one going to pay $5,000. So, and I think John got the first one, and Glenn got the second one, but same thing. And so that's where Glenn got outbid on something. When I left, it wasn't just me, but our membership, it was about 2,400 when we moved in. When we left, it was about 3,400. And I know right after that, I think when Mike McKee came in, they were saying, "We've been talking about building some more up here, Mike." And Mike said, "Well, you know, you don't do anything in the first year. You know, you just get acquainted and get things going." And they said, "We want to build." I've really been blessed in being at places where I pastored. And Hurst was an interesting place, because I came in, and I think it was to reach the whole community and to grow. I was here to be able to try to help the church get a footing and a mission outlook. They had done well with some other preachers that had been here, but it was time for them to build. And that was my job. We left in 1990, and I went to be in the Methodist Church, the district superintendent. So I went to Waco District, and see, there I was to help coordinate for about 50 churches. and go out and visit with them to see what they're doing, what they're not doing, and make suggestions and talk with them and such. And so after 6 years, then I went to work with the Texas Methodist Foundation. It's in Austin, Texas. It's where you can put your money, but also it makes loans to churches for and such. And I was doing development work there. You know, I loved coming back and sitting in that sanctuary and saying, "Thank you, God," because this church is still growing. Thank goodness that other good preachers came in there to help in keeping it going. And see, that's the thing, that people here have high expectations, but they deliver. And that's part of the DNA that's in Hearst Methodist Church, United Methodist. It's just a we can do it attitude. And I like that, you know. He did children's time for children of all ages, you know, because the old ones would come up and say, "I think y'all talking to me too." Now, finally, you're going to get something going that's really good. What do you mean? Well, you're talking about all the things that you did. Okay. You didn't tell her what I did. What'd you do? I tell you what, if kids come to church and see me, they're going to come back. Really? Yeah, they say, "Mama, Daddy, let's go back and see that house." Sometimes I go to the hospitals too. Somebody's sick, and I know what's up. Come on, and he'll go in to see them, and they say, "Where's Squeaky? You didn't bring Squeaky with you." Well, okay. So see, I can help them on that. Well, what else have you done? Well, I've actually helped do funerals, and then all the second grade kids is going to come to the funeral. And Mama and Daddy said, "Could you tell these little kids something about it so they can understand?" Okay. And I did. I tried. Okay. And I do some other things. Okay. Some of these kids, when they grew up and they were thinking they was going to get married, they wanted me to do the wedding. Well, did you? No, I don't have a license. I can't do it. But I did the rehearsal. So I've been busy. I get around. And you know, those old folks like me too. They do. Why, sure, you like me. Yeah, and I'm one of those old folks too. I never did go to the city council, but I told you what to do when I got there. That's right, I did some of it like that, that's for sure. When I got him, I put him in an old brown grocery sack, you know, big sack, and just stick him down and roll it up and carry it out, and this lady just had a fit. So she said, "I'm going to do something." So she made him a sack. She made a real problem because she put cats in here. And so Squeaky had to talk about that, you know. When we were trying to plan the church and going through the process, and the man that was set it all up, he sat down and said, "Y'all been in this other building. So what is significant that everybody would know about that you think could be transferred over to the new building?" And they said, "Well, a mouse and a bird." And he said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, Squeaky, he's a mouse. And then birds are way up at the top, and there's a window up there, and it had a little crack in it, and the birds, sparrows, would get in, and they'd have a nest up there maybe, and there'd be one of them flying around in the sanctuary while we were preaching." So then he did the window, and in the window put a mouse and a bird. They both were very strong people, smart and working hard, and they understood hard work. From down at the ranch, and Eric ran with 2 or 3 guys, and one of them's father put in light poles. And so he got them a job putting in light poles in the alleys, you know, mainly Arlington, some over here, wherever it was, and they dug those things by hand. Bill and Eric were going to Western Hills, and Bill was playing football. He was just everything like that, and Eric wasn't quite that way. He was a great player. And when he was a freshman, whatever, and they were looking for him to come up, and Bill graduated and Eric went to be a sophomore, and he said, I don't want to play anymore. I said, why? And he said, I don't like practice. You get in here and do the same thing all the time. And then I love the games, but he quit. And they were going to use him on offense and defense as a sophomore. They got upset. His principal over at Western Hills, I think that was before speed dialing, but he had my phone number memorized. And one of the things that they did was say, okay, some of you guys are wearing bad shorts that they're torn. Of course, now they'd be good, but they're shreds and this sort of thing, and said they're just not good. So all you guys cannot wear shorts that and they got to be right where the knee is. Okay. So Eric came in saying that they were going to protest. And I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I think there were 4 or 5 of them. They went to the girlfriends and said, give us those short miniskirts. So each one of them found one that they could wear. And I just said, well, you better take your pants with you when you go. And so they went in up there with the miniskirts on. And the principal called them in and said, what are y'all doing? Said, well, these girls can wear this, and that's okay. But said, there's about 20 of these guys that had bad shorts. You didn't say that. You just said everybody. And we weren't doing anything with bad shorts. We were wearing good ones. So we just thought we'd wear something that was short. And he called me. My secretaries knew his voice. And he said, I'm going to go call your dad. Eric said, fine. So he called me and said, you know what your kids did today? And I said, yeah. I said, they wore some skirts, didn't they? He said, yes, they did, sure did. And you knew about it? And I said, yes. And he said, and you let them do it? And I said, yes, because I think he's right. You don't punish the whole group for what happened by just a few of them. Those people are ready to reach out and help people. And so I was able to stimulate that, and be stimulated by it, and grow and say, yeah, something might work. I'm retired now, but I'm working part-time, but also simply to be able to help people. And I know better how to do that now because of First Church Hurst. Not many people have an opportunity to work and be senior pastor of a church like that. Still growing.